Today I'm going to talk about working in your car and also driving a truly remote workstation working from your car. My name is Daryl Stephenson and I'm the ergonomist at Ocow in Hamilton. So to go over the outline of the presentation, I'm going to be looking at MSDs and driving and the factors that go into that. So things like vibration, static postures, and non-neutral postures. Then provide some solutions and suggestions on how to set up yourself for driving and making the adjustments in the car. Then I'm going to talk about working in the car, so doing things like office work, taking calls, and being somebody that takes packages out of cars and different jobs that can come out of the car. And then I'm going to talk a little about the human factors and trying to stay safe on the road and things you can do. So MSDs, there's a lot of them that can happen from the cars. And actually in the UK, they're so common that they've termed it RDI, so repetitive driving injury. So generally we see a lot of low back or generalized back pain from being in the car, different spine issues, disc degeneration, herniation, sciatica. We can have a lot of neck issues, shoulder, even knee and elbow, and foot cramps, which I'll go over a bit. So who is at risk while driving? It's pretty much anybody, all drivers. That box kind of sums it up right there. We see a lot more in the bigger heavy equipment, things like forklift operators and heavy equipment operators. And that's due a lot to the increased amount of vibration if they're going on rougher terrain, or a lot of times in those type of jobs, they have to look all around to see what they're doing and try to look down and see what's going on. So they have some non-neutral postures. And if you're someone in one of those older machines, they don't have the adjustability and the suspension systems that are as good. But it's in all drivers, and people driving in the city, truck drivers, bus drivers, taxi drivers, salesmen, but even commuters, people just driving to work back and forth every day at long distances. So the issues that cause these MSDs that we'll go over are things like whole body vibration, definitely non-neutral postures, and that's the one that you can really start controlling today and try to fix today while driving and also while working in the car. A lot of static contractions. A lot of these have a really good crossover with office work, and especially while working in the car and while driving, a lot of these definitely cross over, and you want to have some of the same postures that we try to promote within the office work. You can have things like cramps and pressure points and poor blood circulation, especially in the lower body, due to seating, if the seats are too big or too small. Then, lifting after driving is definitely a problem for delivery people or anyone trying to carry a big load after working. Yeah, home care nurses as well. I just saw that come up. Definitely, driving to a different community and then having to go and assist and lift patients, definitely a big one. Duration of driving, so it's been shown over 30 kilometers per day is actually you're at 2 to 4 times the risk of lower back pain. Then there's psychological factors like stress. And as we know, stress can add to the chance of MSDs. When you're under a lot of stress, your muscles will activate more, and you're going to have less rest time. And if you're driving in heavy traffic and you're getting close to the wheel, and you're really in a tense situation, you're going to have less blood flow, and you're going to be less relaxed, and that in turn can lead to your fatigue overall for your muscles and further MSDs. And then definitely fatigue, and not just mental fatigue, but the effect of all these things above that I've talked about can add to your muscle fatigue throughout the day, and as the day prolongs, you're going to potentially have problems. So just some quick stats that I pulled out. So individuals who drove more than 20 hours a week for their job were absent from work with back pain at a rate of 6 times higher than those who drove less than 10 hours per week. And these next ones kind of go together. Non-neutral trunk postures while driving were significant predictors of lower back pain prevalence. And in one study, they showed that 50% of drivers underestimated the time they spent bending, which I thought was really interesting. And it's again, if you get into those tense situations, driving in heavy traffic, the tendency is to get closer to the wheel and to lean in, very similar to office work. If your monitor's a little too far away, or you're like, okay, I'm going to get to work now, I'm going to read, you tend to sit up sit forward, and you get out of that, get into a bad back posture potentially. So really telling yourself and reminding yourself, sit with a good posture, even when it's a tense situation. The things that we see with the back and the neck injuries, the main hazards for them are going to be sitting for long periods of time, whole body vibration, and then the potential for awkward postures while driving. So sitting is definitely a hazard, as we know. It's an awkward posture, as we could see from this diagram to the right here. When you're standing, you have that nice S curve, and it creates a nice curve in your lower back, and this creates normal disc pressure. But when you're sitting, when your pelvis rotates there, you're going to have a flattened lower back, and this actually can create higher pressures on the disc. And it puts your back in a worse position. It also kind of stretches out the ligaments in your back while you're sitting for long periods of time. So if you're going for a very long drive, stretching out those ligaments and then trying to lift something right after can be potentially dangerous. And it can also restrict blood flow and circulation in the muscles and cause more fatigue. And then the more fatigued you are, the less support that they're going to give to your back. So long-term sitting, it's a static posture, but it's definitely not void of muscle contraction. So even when you're sitting in a nice posture, you're still going to have muscles that are working throughout your back, and they're going to be constantly working, while some of the other ones might not be working throughout the day. So that's why it's important to shift your position a bit, especially with the incline of the chair, to help out distribute that and hopefully get some different muscles working. Then also taking breaks, get the muscles working, give some of them a little bit of a break as well. Okay, so if we look at the posture and the lumbar load, this graph just kind of shows if you're lying on your back, there's not that much pressure on your back and on your lumbar load. When you're standing, there's a bit more, but when you're sitting, it's actually more than when you're standing, and that's kind of what we were just talking about with the lumbar load there. And if you're bending over, and especially sitting while bending over, you're going to have even more pressure, and that's due to the weight of the torso and the head. And if we could continue this graph out, we would see if you're twisting, you're going to cause even more forces and then add vibration on top of that. So that's why it's important to get that lumbar support, especially when driving. Again, the sitting, it's going to change. It's going to flatten the lumbar curve. It's going to change the biomechanics of the spine. It's going to increase the forces on the discs, increase the length of the ligaments, and increase muscle tension overall. So we definitely need to try to support that curvature of the lower back. But it's also important not to over-exaggerate that. You don't want to be sticking huge objects, big, huge lumbar supports like behind your back that exaggerates that curve too much. You want to have a nice pressure all the way up from your lower back to your upper back along the seat. And we'll talk about that a bit more as I go through. So just to touch on whole body vibration. Vibration is transmitted through the back and the buttocks when sitting. It's transmitted, from the road conditions through the suspension system in the car, then through the seat, and then through you. And every object has a resonant frequency, and these, the human bodies has low resonant frequencies, and often the vibration from the road is within that frequency, and this is going to increase the risk of injury. And if over time, the long-term exposure to this, it's going to cause things like disc displacement, degenerative spinal changes, lumbar scoliosis, intervertebral disc disease, herniated discs, and even disorders in the gastrointestinal system. Also, the vibration is going to cause little bursts of muscle activity within your back. So again, it's just going to keep adding to that fatigue factor throughout the day. And it's tough to get away from vibration. As you can see here, I'm not going to read through all those, but just about every single vehicle is going to cause vibration. And in this study here, they showed that just all these vehicles exposed the operators to vibration levels that were in excess of those recommended by the International Standards Organization, the ISO 26311. And then also in other studies, I don't have the study link here, but if you want to email me after, I can provide that. But they showed that different seating can actually amplify the vibration. And some of these, termed good ergonomic seatings and different systems that you can put in there sometimes amplified the vibration. So it's a tricky thing to help out. But if we're going to try to reduce the effects of vibration, things that we can do, things like improve the vehicle suspension, maintain the equipment properly, proper engineering of the seating. So definitely that maintain equipment properly is a big one that we see with heavy machine operators. If they're using a system that's 20 years old, just making sure it's still working correctly and having regular checks to do that. You can use materials that generate less vibration. Then we can also do things like reduce the speed of travel. You can increase the rest and recovery time between the exposures. So if you're having workers work with heavy machines, a lot of times these workers are working 12-hour shifts and long days. If you try to alternate the tasks throughout the day to try to minimize that vibration exposure, give them different rest times, and give them different jobs throughout the day, this can help out. Electric vehicle have less or no vibration? That's a good question, actually. I didn't find that. I will look that up after. So you can do things like modifying the seat and control positions. You can add some backrest support, reduce forward, sideways, or leaning of the trunk. Again, those awkward positions that you put yourself in are just going to increase the forces to your spine. So you can eliminate those awkward postures. Even things like making sure that you can see the dashboard clearly, don't have objects up on your windows that cause you to look up and look around and put yourself in awkward postures. So setting yourself up from the start so that you don't have to do that is important. One job that I was on, actually, we looked at snowmobile drivers, snowplow drivers, and they constantly were having to look around. Every time they backed up, they had to pretty much turn their whole body. And what we ended up doing was providing them with more mirrors in the cab itself, and that stopped those twisting postures to a degree. You can also reduce or isolate from the vibration sources. So things like better seating, the spring or suspension systems that can go underneath the seats that can act as an isolator. And then actually about 4 or 5 years ago, 2016, at the RSI day here, Krosh did a presentation, and they showed that there's now phone apps that can kind of help and measure these different forces. So there are fancy, expensive machines that can do it, but it looks like there's ways that you can potentially measure it yourself. So just some other injuries that are less, or MSDs that are less talked about. So knee, shoulder, elbow, and foot. So definitely knee pain can happen if you're in non-neutral postures. If you're cramped up in a 90-degree posture, and also repetitive use or pressure from too large of a seat, that can add to potential knee pain. Shoulder pain from having elevated arms. If your wheel is too high and you're constantly elevating your arms the entire day, or even manual cars have more movement with the upper body. So definitely automatics have the advantage there, even though I drive a manual myself. Elbow pain is one that rarely gets talked about, but with ulnar neuropathy, the compression of the ulnar nerve. So if we see in that picture there, on the inside of your elbow is that ulnar nerve. And if you're driving and you put your elbow up on the window, like many people like to do in the summer, that's going to compress that nerve, and potentially over time you can get numbness in your hands and problems from that. So try not to drive as much with your elbow resting on the window. Have it on the armrest, and if you can't stop yourself from doing it, try to put a little pad under there, something to stop the hardness and the compression that's happening. Anywhere in your body that you have a bony surface and no muscle or fat over it is potentially can get these compression issues. Also, there's foot cramps, making sure that you're close enough that your full foot can be on the pedal and not just extending with your toes, pressing. Also, extending like that with your toes is generally going to force people over time to move their lower back off the seat and get into, out of that nice curve for your lower back. Okay, so definitely lifting after prolonged sitting is a pretty common issue. Doing any type of forceful movements with your back could potentially hurt you. So it's important to be ready for that and to use proper techniques that we'll talk about. So you want to adopt good postures when manual material handling. Get as close to the item as possible so you're not reaching and bending and creating more forces that are farther away from you. So things like organizing the trunk accordingly, maybe using nets or barriers that can keep things towards the edge of the trunk, even using trunks that are not as deep. And I know a lot of trucks these days are creating different ways with the back of the tailgate there that they can come down and help people get objects off easier. Then try to park as close as you can to possible drop-off points so you're not carrying this load really far. And definitely warm up. When you get out, especially after a long drive, walk around. Walking is one of the best things you can do. You want to do light movements. Don't just get out and do a big back stretch or anything that can put you in an awkward posture right away, but definitely get the blood flowing. Get your glutes moving that have been elongated and sat on for the entire time. Stretch out your hips a little bit and create that blood flow before you start lifting things. You can use things like wheeled bags, wheeled suitcases, and trolleys, and this can help out just reduce the force of lifting. And if you have to carry a bunch of objects, don't try to stack them all up and carry them at once. Really take multiple trips and reduce the load each time so it's not so heavy on your back. So here's just some pictures of good postures that you can have. So that top left one's pretty standard. Just try to bend at the knees. Try to remove that big C curve looking curve in your back as you're lifting there. Remain in neutral postures. That middle picture is, often termed the golfer's lift, where you can stick one leg back and it actually keeps your back in a more neutral posture. And it's a good technique to use even when picking things off the ground. Try to use that technique, just small objects. If you're going to lean over to pick a piece of garbage off the floor, that can be often helpful. Then if something's really heavy, you see in that bottom right picture, we can get our knee up and create a little leverage point to reduce the load on you as well. Just really avoid that far-reaching bending and curving of your back. So selecting a vehicle, you want to make sure it matches the requirements for your body size of the driver and any physical limitations that you might have. And, car companies, they want to sell cars and they've, over time, the newer ones are much better in terms of adjustability. And, if you had a 20-year-old truck, it might not work so well for smaller people. But today, things are getting better. But just make sure when you're selecting that vehicle that you actually fit in it, whether it's for rental or for your long-term use. Make sure that the layout and the ergonomic features of the vehicle meet your needs. If you're carrying a lot of big loads, maybe you want to get a truck that's easier to move things out of, or something a little more elevated than a small car. Okay, and just make sure it has the features that assist you in the type of work that the driver is doing. Always think, what am I going to be doing out of this vehicle? And does this car meet these needs, or does this truck meet these needs? So even thinking about loading in the trunk again with the depth, but also with the edge of the border. Some of them are a lot longer or smaller in the border of the trunk that makes you reach over them farther. So if you can be as picky as you can, try to get the smaller ones that you can bring objects closer to your body when lifting. So the ideal things to look for is seats that are adjustable with the back incline that can go to 110 degrees at least, 100 to 110. Then you want adjustable seat bottom depth, height, and incline. Again, adjustability is your biggest friend. Everybody has different anatomy and is built differently, and you want to be able to adjust your car to fit your needs. There's definitely no one size fits all, and adjustability is the only way you're going to get yourself in the safest positions. You want a seat cushion with firm, dense foam. You don't want to be sitting on a pillow, but you also don't want to be sitting on a rock. So try to find something in the middle that's going to support you and not cause you to sink into it, but also not going to cause any pressure that's not too nice on your body. You want an adjustable lumbar support. many of them do have the horizontal in and out to kind of expand. But if you can get a vertical lumbar support that can go up and down, that's really helpful too. Because again, people are built differently, and you want to be able to slide that up and down until it fits that curve of your lower back. You want to be able to sit down and feel that your lower back isn't collapsing out when you're sitting, and also not getting pushed forward. And you also want to feel like that lumbar support isn't in the wrong spot. If it's in your middle back, it's not helping you out at all. Or if it's down too far where you're not feeling it. So with those lumbar supports, you can also, add in your own. There's a lot of products out there that are lumbar supports that can attach into the car. And you want to make sure it's not exaggerating that lower lumbar support, but it's also fitting you. You can also even roll up a towel, something small like that, and put that in your lower back. And the only problem with that, though, is once you start driving and moving around, that support's going to move around. So when you're looking for lumbar supports, try to get something that can either Velcro around or be pulled and tied around, and that stays in place as you're going. Armrests aren't in all cars, but they can be helpful as long as they're in the right positions. And then an adjustable head restraint that can actually go, if you're a tall person, make sure it can go up and protect you when you get hit from behind. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So seat shock absorbers that can dampen frequencies, again, those low frequencies. Linear front to back seat travel if you have longer legs or shorter legs. And then a seat back that can reduce the rebounding of the torso and rear end impacts. So just a nice quality seat. So if you're looking at the seat base, these two pictures here show seats that are bad. So the top right one is too short, and the bottom right one is going to be too long. And as you can see, if you're in that too short, too small seat, those knees are going to be way above your hips. And what that's going to do is cause a lot of pressure in your lower butt and not be distributed well along your leg. And over time, if you drive like that, you're going to start to curve your lower back and potentially get in a worse position. So you want something that comes out to about 2 to 3 inches away from your leg. But conversely, in that bottom picture, the seat's too long, and it's going to cause a pressure point in the back of the leg and cause issues with circulation. There's also a couple other things wrong in that bottom picture. The wheel is very close to the person's body, and that's a big time safety hazard. I know in Canada they recommend 10 to 12 inches away for the airbags, but I would always check with the manufacturer of your car and see what they recommend for that. So looking at the backrests, you want to ensure that the height of the backrest reaches the shoulder and does not obstruct your rearward vision. Then you want to ensure that the backrest is also wide enough to support your shoulders. So you want to be able to sit back in your seat and have your upper back on the seat as well. The steering wheel is a very important one to be able to adjust. You want to be able to adjust in and out, up and down, and tilt. And most of steering wheels do the up and down and the tilt, but not a lot of them do the in and out. But that's a really important one. Again, it's if your steering wheel's too far away, it's much like having your monitor too far away when you're working in an office. You're going to lean in, especially once you're in heavy traffic. You're going to lean in and have to lean off your seat, and you're going to lose that nice S-curve support in your back. Power steering is definitely in most vehicles these days, but it's definitely a big help. And then you want the centrally positioned, not offset wheel to prevent rotation of the spine, although I don't really see too many offset in regular vehicles. And then you want to ensure that the steering wheel does not obstruct the display panel. And I touched on this a little bit earlier. If you can't see your speed and how fast you're going, and you have to lean to look every time, it's going to just put you in a bit of an awkward posture every time that you do that. Also, if the wheel's too high and you can't see over it, you're going to be in an awkward posture again. Or if your seat's too high and you have to look under to see lights and things like that, just making sure that your seated posture, you can see what you need to see and you don't have to get out of that posture. Then you want to tilt the airbags so they're pointed at your chest and not your face. So just some quick steps for injury prevention. learn how to get in and out of your vehicle. Learn where the handles are, and make sure they work for you getting in and out, especially if you're doing that a lot of times throughout the day and in poor weather conditions. Use a good sitting posture. So use that lumbar support like we talked about. And then if possible, tilt the seat back a notch or two back and forth every 20 to 30 minutes. And this is going to alter not only what back muscles are kind of being used, but also the direction of the vibration, which is important. So just think about, as long as you're not putting yourself in an awkward posture, you don't want to tilt the seat so far back that you feel like your neck is flexed and you're doing a sit-up. We also don't want to put it 90 degrees up, right, so that you're losing that support and you're getting into like that C curve that we talked about. So just tilt it back and forth every once in a while. Every 20 to 30 minutes will help with a lot of things. Adjust your steering wheel, so ensure that you can press the pedals without moving your low back off the seat. Again, a lot of car assessments that I've done, it really helped to bring the steering wheel a little bit more towards people so they just don't lean off their seat and they can have their arms at their sides and be in a better position with their back. Avoid slouching, and if possible, again, change positions while you drive. Adjust your headrest so that it's safe and your head's right in the middle of the headrest. And then try to take regular stretch breaks. And 5 minutes is good. Just pulling over every, as Ronnie talked about, 2 hours in a regular seat. Now a car seat's generally going to be worse than the office seat, plus the vibration. So even less than that, maybe an hour. Get out, take a little stretch break, and walk and use your glutes again. Get those muscles going. So these are some pictures I took of myself trying to get my vehicle set up. So if we start from the bottom up, we go try to get your foot fully on the pedal and that your back isn't coming off to push the pedal and that you're not just extending with your toes, causing any foot cramps. Try to get your knees in line with your hips as much as possible and a nice flat distribution of pressure along the bottom of your leg. So you're not putting all that pressure in your butt, but you're also not getting pressure in the back of your leg. Again, with that 2 to 3 fingers of space between the edge of your seat and your lower leg. And then you want a good 20 to 30 degree knee angle if possible. That's going to be a little bit harder on the pedal side, but just trying not to be in that cramped up 90 degree position. You want to get your seat tilt to about 100 to 110 degrees and the lumbar support right in your lumbar curve of your spine. And then you want always your upper back against the seat. So be in a position, that's why it definitely helps with that wheel, being able to bring it forward. And actually mine in my truck there doesn't actually come forward. So ideally, I would be able to bring that towards me more than it is in that picture. You want your arms close to your sides. Again, the wheel 10 to 12 inches away is the general recommendation, but I would always check with your car and manufacturer. Your elbows slightly bent. You don't want your shoulders elevated up where you're holding your arms up the whole time. And then it's suggested for safety reasons, the 9 and 3 positions with both hands on the wheel. I think that's for airbag considerations as well. But if you're driving long periods of time, when you pull up to a long red light and you have the time, you can put your arms down, give your shoulders a bit of a rest and your neck a rest every once in a while when you can. And then the headrest, you want your head, again, about 3 inches above the wheel so you don't have to perk up to look around. You want try to get your ear in line with your collarbone so that your head's not leaning forward and tilted forward. Keep your head close to the headrest, at least within an inch. So you don't want to have that huge whiplash effect if somebody hits you from behind. And then try to keep the back of your head in the middle of the headrest. And actually, I wish my headrest could go a bit higher, but I'm tall and that's as high as it can go. And again, the best posture is the next posture. Try to change up your postures as long as you're staying within those neutral postures. And a good tip to do this is to check by using your mirrors. So if you set yourself up in a really good posture and then set your mirrors up from that posture, you can tell if you start to slouch throughout the day as you're driving, you'll go and look up and the mirror won't be in the correct spot, and that'll kind of remind you to get back in that posture. So now looking at working from your vehicle, a census-wide survey, I think this is in the UK, showed that during COVID now, 1 in 10 are regularly working from their vehicle. And this can entail the use of a laptop or just doing general paperwork in your car, using your mobile phone, or being somebody that delivers things in manual handling. Also, a lot of people, even if they're working from their home office, it's tough. I know in my house, I got a little 9-month-old running around. It's going out and being able to take calls and meetings. A lot of people are doing that now just to get some privacy and to be able to do that without any background noise. So there's a lot more people are going towards working in their car in the last few years. So some possible issues while you're working in your car, definitely static and awkward postures, which we're going to see in some pictures. Twisting and leaning to one side, leaning forward, slouching, cramped positions. If I'm trying to work on a laptop in my driver's seat and the wheel and everything's in the way, you can definitely get in some cramped postures. And then lack of adjustability. It's not going to be as good as having, your external monitors that you would in an office situation and a very adjustable chair and things that you can move around. You're going to be in some tighter quarters and lack some of the adjustability. So there's some workarounds that we can try to do for that. So what is the optimal way to work? If you go on Google and look up mobile office setups and car office setups, you're going to spiral for a few hours down some interesting pictures and suggestions. And I know I did that for a few hours last week. But as an intelligent ergonomist once told me, Dwayne, who you've already heard from today, the best answer for this is, well, it depends. And that goes for many ergonomic questions. It really depends. So what are you doing for your job? Are you typing a lot? Are you writing a lot? Are you just taking calls? Are you writing in forms? So maybe you have to click with the mouse, write a few lines, click with the mouse, write a few lines. So depending on the type of your work, it's really going to change the way that you should set up your vehicle. And there's no real optimal way to work. But there are some definite suggestions. So as we can see, this was a study done that just looked at these 4 different postures and said, which is the best location for a computer. And I'm going to get into some different ones after this. But just looking at these ones here, we can see the ones on the right, the B and the A there, were the worst postures. So having your computer far away from you and making you twist even farther is the worst way to do it. So trying to get everything as close to you, trying to almost mimic that office setup is the best ways to try to do it. So definitely that A, looking how much she has to turn her torso and reach with her arms is going to cause her to be in a bad, awkward posture a lot more than D or C. There's also new devices and things that can help you set up in different areas of your car. As we can see here, this one holds the laptop up on the steering wheel, and other ones can work in the back seats and in different areas of the car. And these can help you maintain that straight posture with your back so you're not twisting left and right. And I'll get into some more examples of that. Here is an assessment that I worked on, and originally they're looking down to their right to use their laptop, and they had to use this big system to the right that you can see there in the pictures that ran their Wi-Fi and connected all their devices. So originally they're looking down and to the right the whole time that they're typing, and many times they're working up to 3 hours a day like that. So that middle picture we can see, we bring that middle picture we can see that would be similar to working like on a laptop where you can adjust the screen. And again, that is better than the left picture, but it's still, your head is going to be tilted all the way down and putting your neck at an awkward posture. So that right picture, that person had actually put a strap on the back of their tablet there and then hung it on the top of their steering wheel so they can try to mimic more of an office setup. They were also able to use an external keyboard that has a little mouse pad on it, so you can sit in a little bit better of a posture. And that's not always going to be the case. Some people have big laptops that they can't use that, or maybe the size of the steering wheel and their chair doesn't allow them to get in these postures. But I definitely recommend having a working posture and a driving posture. So, taking the time to push your seat back, tilt the wheel to the right spot if you're working out of the driver's seat, or setting up a posture in a different seat, and having two of those. Don't just try to keep everything the same. Set it up for your driving, learn what the proper postures are for driving, set it up like that, and then have one for working as well. Here's another option that they came up with. This is, I think, a RAM product, but they had to use these big monitor arms that connected right to the passenger seat, but also ran a lot of their systems. So they were able to talk with the company and get a bunch of different extensions that allowed the monitor to come over a lot farther and be elevated a lot more. So again, just finding different solutions out there to make it work for what they needed to do is important, and trying to get in those correct postures any way that they can. It's also important that, once they start driving, that they can move that system down so it's not blocking their view as they're driving. So you'll see a lot on the internet about working out of the passenger seat or the back seat. A lot of articles say, you should work out of the passenger seat for these reasons. It's gives you more room because of the steering wheel. But again, it really depends. It is useful if you need more room, and if you can't work with cramped up in front of the driver's seat. It avoids the twisting to use the laptop computer if you were twisting to the passenger seat to use it. However, the seating generally isn't as adjustable, is the only issue. So if your passenger seat is not as adjustable, and especially in the back seats, there's rarely very much adjustment that can be made. So you're going to lose that lumbar support. You might lose some of the incline. So just keeping that in mind, if you're going to be working out of a back seat, it may not be as adjustable. Now, it helps to change it up if possible. If you can work out of different seats, if they all cause slightly different issues, try to mix it up as much as you can. And you also may be restricted by your equipment. So as we could see, we talked in this last slide, we talked about working from the passenger seat, but they couldn't possibly do it with that system set up in there. And many people have, storage in their passenger seat, or I've seen people with printers in their glove box. So depending on what you have going on, you just have to make it work for yourself as good as possible. So organization really helps. Extreme or awkward postures can happen when you're searching for scattered documents. If you're trying, if you drive for a few hours and then go to find something under the passenger seat or in the back seat, that twist can cause you an extreme awkward posture and possibly cause an issue. There's also safety issues if items aren't secured. Having your laptop fly off could be a big issue. So you can see in this picture here, this storage box that they're using is actually secured by the seat belt running through a loop in the back of it so that it doesn't fly off. There's also, added mental stress from the clutter, or time loss, searching for things. But, car companies are realizing that people are working out of the cars a lot more these days. And a lot of them now have consoles with molded in file hangers and reconfigurable apartments that you can adjust the whole vehicle. There's a lot of big trucks that really have a big office in the back that can be completely adjustable to your needs. And you really want to use that. You want to customize the vehicle to fit the way you work. If you're somebody that reaches into to find documents 300 times a day, you don't want to be putting that in the back seat while working in your driver's seat and constantly twisting all day long. Try to make it work that you can get in those non-neutral postures, neutral postures throughout the day. Okay, and also, again, don't place items in an area that would restrict your vision. If you can picture a lot of people just throwing their books or their laptops up on their dashboard, if you start driving with that, it could cause a lot of issues trying to look around it, not seeing someone coming. And those are going to be, a lot worse than MSDs. Then using non-skid surfaces is a good idea. If you're writing on documents or using your laptop, you don't always know where you're going to be parked. And sometimes you're parked up on a hill, and you don't want to constantly have to be holding your documents in place as you're trying to work. Then there's, new technology that can help you. So voice-activated systems. can help you place calls, listen, or answer texts even, enter destinations, do all these fancy functions using the car's sound system. So it stops you from having to look at a screen. But just keep in mind that, this is still a distraction, and the distraction, as I'll show at the end of the presentation, is the biggest risk by far to driving. So just make sure, I know a lot of companies that have policies where you can't use your phone in the car, even just talking on the phone through hands-free, it's still a distraction to you. So just be aware of that. Okay, voice to text for typing. So this is more if you're typing in the car, just working. This is a good feature that in the past couple of years has really took off and been a lot better than it used to be. So if you're somebody that has to type a big report out, and you got a laptop in the car and that's all you really have to work with, you don't want to be, like Ronnie was saying, with the laptop, you're either going to be looking down, or it's going to be elevated and your shoulders are going to be elevated the whole time. So these voice to text typing services, I know Google Docs has one, and Microsoft 365 really work well if you want to get used to them and be able to just type by talking. Okay, touch screens, a lot of them are useful, but obviously don't attempt them while you're driving, and for long typing sessions, you're going to be really elevating your shoulders again or looking down again. So in that case, like I showed in that example, external keyboard and mouses can be really helpful. Even having a little lap desk on you, a small one, and then putting the external keyboard and mouse on top of that, or a built-in system that has the keyboard and the mouse, a little mouse pad on it. So trying to stay in those good postures, those things can really help, just like they do in an office setup. Again, the cell phone use, you have Bluetooth, hands-free. Obviously, there's laws now. You should never be talking on your actual phone. But again, be aware it still is a risk. So just some added new technology that's out there. There's Wi-Fi and signal boosters that can connect to vehicles. They can connect to passengers' phones and laptops who are also in the vehicle, and even allow you to work outside of the vehicle if you want to park, in a park or somewhere in a parking lot and be outside your vehicle. Maybe, a good idea is if you can park somewhere and take the call outside of the car so you can get out and walk around and not be confined in the car. Take advantage of things like the remote starts and door unlocks. Especially here in Canada right now, it's so cold. If you can get the car warmed up before you get in there. There's plug-in power converters, so you can plug in all your laptops and different systems now. But be aware, just make sure you set up these systems before you start driving. Don't get in and get on the road and then start plugging things in. It's just more of a distraction. So just try to make sure you set these things up before you get on the road. So human factors in driving, are some of the basic issues, things like speeding, fatigue, and again, distracted driving. Speeding, it's not only unsafe because it's harder to react and you're going fast, but it actually can breach a lot of the safety features of the car. So things like anti-lock braking systems, brake assist, electronic brake force distribution, stability control, a lot of these things that are built in to make the car safer, they'll be breached if you're driving too fast. So speeding is still a big issue for all those reasons. Fatigue is going to be a big issue. If you don't get enough sleep or you're on any kind of alcohol or drug, we should be aware that we shouldn't be doing that. Or on any type of medication or prolonged hours of driving throughout the day, you're going to get fatigued, or the time of day. And this is going to affect you. If you're nodding off at the wheel, you're going to have slower reaction times, reduced overall attention on the road. You're going to make slower decisions. You're just going to be slower overall and a worse driver. So just make sure, coffee doesn't fix everything. If you're driving for the long period of time and you feel fatigued, maybe it's a good idea to stop and to pull over, get some rest, or work more another day. Distracted driving is by far the worst and causes the most accidents. So as we can see, it's something like texting, which obviously we should never do. It's 23 times more likely to be involved in a crash or near crash event And that bottom stat, 80% of collisions have some form of driver inattention as contributing to the factors. Obviously, cell phones are the most common distraction. That's why a lot of workplaces have the policies you shouldn't be on your cell phones, even talking to people. So distracted drivers are 3 times more likely to be in a crash than attentive drivers. And again, even if you're on your cell phone, the idea is that if you have a passenger in the car, they can actually see what's going on. An adult passenger, they can be more aware of the dangers you might be in. Maybe you're switching lanes and you need them to stop talking. They'll be able to see, and they might be able to give you a heads up if something's happening on the road. But somebody that you're talking to on the phone doesn't know these, and they're going to try and get your attention because you're talking to each other, and it might draw your attention away from the road. So just be aware when you're talking. It still is a big distraction, even if you're on the hands-free. Okay, and then if you have children in the car, it's shown to be 4 times more distracting as adults as passengers, and infants are 8 times. And similar to the people that are talking to you on the phone, they're just not as aware of the dangers that are out there. So just be aware. Distraction is your biggest enemy, and you want to try to avoid it at all costs. And children and infants can be even more of a distraction. Okay, so your brain is your vehicle's most important safety feature, and I definitely highly suggest checking this website out, Brain on Board, Myths and Misconceptions. It's a very comprehensive list of tips and solutions to keep you safe on the road. And if you have any questions about the presentation, just email me at this email below. And I also wanted to give a special thanks to Brenda Malott, who is an ergonomist at OCAL, who's retiring this year, and she originally came up with this presentation and provided a lot to the ergonomic community as a whole.
Great. Thank you very much, Daryl. I do know that there are a couple questions for you, but before we do move on to the questions, I do just want to remind people, if they do not mind filling in the survey that has been posted in the chat, just to give us some feedback on how today's day went. And at the same time as well, Daryl's posted the next 3 topics, the next 3 weeks for their next 3 sessions. Next week will be the introduction of our anthropometric calculator tool that was just created, as well as a presentation on the rapid upper limb assessment tool. And with that, Val, I'll turn it over to you for questions for Daryl and any other ones for Ronnie.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Daryl. That was really informative, and there's so many things to think about that really mean that cars do not make the best offices, I think, is the conclusion I've come to. But I know that that so many people end up having to deal with that. There were a few questions at the beginning. I'm just that were related to not having like the equivalency with machine operators, and there may be some parallels, but I know that this one was specific to driving cars. And then also some, so maybe you can speak to that, and also around electric vehicles, more or less vibration, which I think was actually answered later. But do you have any comments on either of those?
Actually, I saw in the chat somebody posted as I was seeing those questions. Yeah, definitely the heavy operator in the machines can cause more vibration. Hopefully they have better suspension systems built into them. A lot of them have very expensive ones. And then again, the non-neutral postures that they get themselves into throughout the day. But electric vehicles, that was a great one that somebody brought up. And then somebody also, I think, linked in the chat that electric vehicles have less vibration. There's still going to be vibration from the road. That's going to depend on the suspension system, and the type of road that you're on, and the potholes and things like that. But from the vehicle itself, yeah, there's vibrations that come from the engine and are transferred as well. So it's it seems like they would be less.
And then there was a more like an answer around propulsion mode does not affect suspension or vibration, except for in diesel vehicles which have in low gear, I guess. So And then there was more of a comment around a condition, piriformis condition. Is that something that occurs as people move their foot back and forth between the gas and the brake frequently?
Um, well, I know I've seen issues with the knee moving back and forth, um, and especially with manual cars.
This was a buttock thing, but and then there was some talk about a past EU standard for the cabin design, but that isn't active anymore. And I think that actually got answered later on. And then there were a couple questions related to the adjustable backrest. First of all, the height, whether it should be head height or neck height. I think you may have covered that later. And then why 1 inch away? I think 1 inch behind. I think which was maybe mentioned in your drawing in your one. Are you there, Daryl?
I think he got disconnected, Val, because the second one is showing as not being available either.
Okay, so do you know the answers to these, or I could?
He's still showing as being online.
Oh,
I'm
he
sorry.
was on.
Yeah, I'm not overly sure, Val, the exact positioning of the headrest, to be honest with you.
Well, for
I'm
safety
not sure.
reasons, it is supposed to be at your ear height, and that's to do with whiplash prevention, as far as I know, which is sort of classic driver safety, that as I understand it. So that it's a bit tricky, and I think some of the later questions and comments are actually related to there's a lot of safety issues and driving safety issues that so there's the ergonomics issues and the hazards around posture and reach and the physics of the work, but there are significant safety issues with having any equipment in the car beside you, and the potential for what can happen in the event of a catastrophic crash with whatever is riding in the car with you or attached to the car. So someone did mention that anything you attach, like a mounting arm, for instance, could actually be quite severe consequence if it could swing and hit you during a crash, or your body could be thrown into it. And also the comment that someone made about airbags creating projectiles. If the car is running and it's in an accident or enough to trigger the airbags, they'll send anything that's in their path flying potentially into you and your head and that kind of thing. So I thought those were
Yeah,
really.
so that's a great point, and there's much things that you can keep in the trunk and lessen the vehicle as
Yes.
possible. Obviously, some of these jobs are built so much around the stuff that they have to have in the car that it's tough. But yeah, great point.
And someone did comment, I think maybe somebody who does this type of work, that they see the injuries most frequently around loading and unloading, or the stuff in and out, the briefcase, the backpack, the box of supplies, not just their secure storage, and as you talked about, their accessibility when you need them to work, but also the loading and unloading.
Yeah, and especially in cars, trying to pull something out of the back seat, having to bend and get in those awkward postures, it can be really tough. So trying to find a vehicle that fits what you need to do on the job as best as possible. But like we've talked about, like you said right away, it's they're not the best. They're not ideal. They're not an ideal office, and
No.
they're not ideal for many things. So it's about trying to reduce the issues as much as possible.
And the one more I have written down here, and then I'll look. There's showing 50 right now. I assume it's, but anyways, and then I have one for Ronnie while I go look for others. But there was a question around whether wearable or mobile technology can be used to help with whole body vibration or hand arm vibration measurement in a vehicle.
Well, I would say refer to that 2016 Crash. Talks a lot about vehicle vibration and about how to measure it. I'm not sure how well it really works with the mobile and the stuff that you can wear like that. but they would have more information on that.
And Daryl, I did post a link to the 2016 presentation in the chat.
Okay, good.
And then that was all that I found so far, but I am looking through it. But there was one more question for Ronnie, if you're still there, which is around the return on investment for sit stands if most people end up fixing them, that they end up being static for most users eventually. And so comment on that, I guess. And also, though, that someone did chime in later and mention that the adjustability does allow the fixed static location to actually be better suited potentially for the user. So the adjustability lets us make it not 29 inches or 30 inches if we're an executive. It allows it to be set up for the individual, even if it is to remain static. So,
Right.
Ronnie,
Yeah.
do you have any comment on either on that?
Yeah, that is a really great question. So as far as when sit-stand desks are given, really they are especially effective when looking long-term for a company. Oftentimes, like mentioned, even if it isn't used to its full functionality where people are sitting and standing, just the fact that it is easily adjustable regardless of the person. Even if a worker is replaced, you don't have to replace the desk as well. So you just have to adjust to that time. So you're really saving the cost of a lot of the adjustments and the extra stuff you're doing as well. So it is a great long-term solution. And just in general, I guess just keeping in mind for the majority of desks and office equipment that is manufactured, it is manufactured keeping in mind anthropometry. So it's designed to be as optimal as possible for as many people as possible. But in doing that, that kind of has a frozen range of who certain equipment can be used for. So even just thinking about what the average height and is for males and females. For males, it's around 5'9". For females, it's around 5'3". But the majority of the equipment being manufactured is for people typically around 5'8" to around 6'2". So even just thinking about that, the amount of people that fall outside of those ranges is fairly high. So having something like a sit-stand desk, it does allow you to adjust everything regardless of the height of the person, which is a fantastic feature. And for people that are on those sides of the spectrum where you fall outside of the normal anthropometry, for that equipment, it is especially useful. So if you have a guy that's 6'6", or a female that's 6'6", or if you have someone that is under 5'8", regardless, there's a lot of cost saving instead of having to bring in a new desk every single time a new person comes. So it's there is the higher cost initially, but over time you do save money if you do get a really good, well adjustable desk in that way.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ronnie. That's and that makes complete sense. And I guess actually we're going to talk about anthropometry and next week, I think, right, Trevor?
We are.
Perfect. Yeah.
I don't see any other questions. There is someone a mention by Parahan of having lost her daughter due to the destruction of a truck driver. So we do want to acknowledge that these things have a real life impact on many people, as Daryl's statistics. So thanks for sharing that, and we're sorry for your loss. So I don't see any other questions. Trevor, do you want to talk about the next few weeks?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, next week is going to be looking, for those that are still here, next week is looking at ergonomic tools, including the release of our new anthropometric calculator tool, as well as a discussion on the rapid upper limb assessment tool. Our following week is going to be regarding musculoskeletal disorders. And then our final week is looking at new technology. If you haven't signed up for those yet, the link is on this page, or you can just Google OCal RSI Day 2021, and the very first link will take you directly to the registration side of the page. With all that said, if there's nothing else, I would like to thank those who presented today, as well as those of you online for taking the time to be with us. And I wish everyone a great weekend. Thank you very much.